Time now for Focus, and today we have a report on Russia's newest presidential contender, Ksenia Sobchak. The 36-year-old celebrity journalist says she's standing as a protest candidate, but she's the daughter of Vladimir Putin's political mentor, and some Russians suspect her candidacy is a Kremlin-backed move to split the opposition. Elena Voloshin and Thomas Lowe report.
The 15th anniversary of the Dubrovka theatre hostage-taking. Survivors and relatives of the victims have come together in solemn commemoration.
Сегодня мы чтим память 130 погибших при штурме. Простите нас за то, что по-прежнему не найдены и не наказаны виновные.
Blamed by the families for his management of the raid by special forces which killed many taken hostage, Vladimir Putin has again failed to turn up. A candidate to replace him as president has arrived, however, an hour after the ceremony ended.
Hello, I'm happy to see you. It's a shame you didn't get here on time. The ceremony took place at 10 this morning.
Well, I came later on purpose so I wouldn't attract too much attention.
Oh, you won't be able to avoid the attention, particularly now you've declared yourself candidate at the presidential election.
He was spot on. Ksenia Sobchak is now the journalist's #1 target. She's in her element and manages the situation with ease.
Do you think Vladimir Putin is responsible for the 130 deaths at Dubrovka?
I think all those who part in the operations shared the responsibility.
A critic of the system, and sometimes a harsh one. Ksenia Sobchak joined the opposition in the winter of 2011-2012 in the streets with the crowd demonstrating against electoral fraud. Vladimir Putin was then elected president for the third time, while Ksenia Sobchak became an opposition journalist. But she was still a socialite, who hosted entertainment and reality TV shows. A label she would now like to get rid of.
To say that I'm the Russian Paris Hilton is to understand nothing about Russia. If you ask any Russian today, they will tell you that I'm an opposition journalist, someone who does major interviews and asks Vladimir Putin the tough questions during press conferences.
And it's her relationship with Vladimir Putin that's causing controversy. That's because Ksenia Sobchak is part of a famous family. Her father is Anatoly Sobchak, the ex-mayor of St. Petersburg who gave Putin his first foothold in politics.
Putin was his deputy mayor. They worked together. I was 10 years old at the time. I have absolutely no recollection of the people who worked with my dad. For me, these were just men in gray suits who came home from work with him and shut themselves in his office to talk. I didn't choose my family, but I certainly chose my opinions. My family's entire history proves yet once more that young people of the new generation have different aspirations. They want to break with the system built by the generation that came before.
But some find it hard to believe that Ksenia Sobchak can make that break. State media is drawn to her, while Russia's #1 opposition figure, Alexei Navalny, is boycotted by government-linked channels. After several arrests and trials, the Electoral Commission has now ruled out his candidature. So even those who move in the same circles as Ksenia Sobchak suspect her presidential bid is supported by the Kremlin. Yulia Teratuta is editor-in-chief of a women's website and a colleague of Sobchak's on a web-based opposition TV channel.
Vladimir Putin is the only person in Russia on whom the participation of candidates in the presidential election really depends. And when he was asked about Ksenia Sobchak, he told the journalists that he wasn't against her candidating. Because of this, we've all concluded that authorization was given. Putin and his administration were looking for ways to spice things up and add some color to an otherwise dreary campaign. And clearly they've chosen Ksenia Sobchak as the new face.
But to register as a candidate, Ksenia Sobchak first has to gather 300,000 signatures. Her Moscow headquarters aren't yet fully set up, but the cogs are already in motion.
Нужен дирижер, который будет этим всем управлять.
Давай начнем, а там посмотрим.
Давай.
Political advisor Vitaly Shklarov worked on the campaigns of both Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders.
Most of all, we're counting on new media and the internet to present a fresh image of a young, contemporary woman. This campaign will be postmodern because we can't beat the Kremlin using standard methods.
A candidate running against the system or a pawn of the Kremlin. In Russia, the views on Ksenia Sobchak's presidential ambitions remain, for the moment, divided.
For more on this, I'm now joined in the studio by Nicola Tenzer, political analyst and the head of CIRAP, the Centre for Research and Political Decisions. Hello, thank you very much for coming in. So, what do you make of Ksenia Sobchak? Do you think she is a genuine opposition figure, or is she being used by the Kremlin?
No, I think it's basically a sham. Basically a sham. It's sort of Murray. It's completely fabricated. She's completely fabricated by the Kremlin, I think, because in order to run for the candidate for the president's elections and also to appear in talk shows in the public television of Russia, you must really be endorsed by the Kremlin. And I think that Putin is just trying to put a sort of diversity, but I think a sort of mock diversity, in the candidates.
Because she's a woman?
Not only because she's a woman, but because, of course, otherwise there could be no real opposition candidate. But it's not true opposition, because, as you know, Navalny is not authorized to run. And Navalny would have been a very serious contender to Vladimir Putin. We see that he is able to attract a lot of people demonstrating, taking part to his meetings all around Russia, not only in Moscow, St. Petersburg, but in more than 80 or 90 cities, around Russia. And I think that's, of course, it's his interest to show that, of course, you have true elections in Russia, you have a genuine candidate. But, of course, I think no one can trust that. And if we consider the last poll made by the opinion poll Levada, which is rather independent, in Russia, she could get only 1% of the vote.
Right. Now, she says, you mentioned Navalny, the opposition leader, Alexei Navalny. Now, he's not allowed to run, but let's say he could. She says that then she would step aside. Do you believe that?
No, I don't believe that. But I think that, of course, Navalny will never be authorized to run because it's really too dangerous for Putin. And I think that actually Putin is really afraid of Navalny, which is fairly new because of the economic crisis, because of the successes of the intervention abroad. You know that many Russian soldiers died in Ukraine, died in Syria, etc. You have a sort of raise of dissatisfactions against the Kremlin. And that's why I think Mr. Putin is afraid. And especially if you see all the demonstrations that you have currently in Russia right now, you have a lot of young people. And, of course, those young people want something completely new. But, Sobchak is not really a new person. Her father, Anatoly Sobchak, was the true mentor of Putin. Without Anatoly Sobchak, Putin would never have succeeded to be president and even to enter into politics. So they have very close ties.
She says her family's one thing, her views are another.
Yes.
She says that she said in that report, she asks Putin tough questions.
Which is obviously not true. Just, I don't know if you read the interview she gave to the London Independent just 6 days ago. She said, the best hope for Russia's liberalizations is Mr. Putin. So she's not credible at all. And we all know that Putin will win the next presidential election. Of course he will
He hasn't said he's running yet, but...
Yes, but I think that we cannot... Because the system run by Putin is not able to create a true candidate, a true person who could really replace Mr. Putin. And that's the total failure of the systems. And that's, of course, the most worrying situation for the future, because we have really nobody. except people like Navalny, but Navalny, of course, in the opposition.
So who are the young people you mentioned before, the young, frustrated people who want change, who don't want Putin? You said only perhaps 1% of voters would vote for Ksenia Sobchak. So who do they have? That there is no candidate for them?
Yes, they have no candidate. And also the opposition is really divided between people like Navalny, but also people like Ilya Yashin, who was a friend of Nemtsov. You have, of course, other people like Karamurza, but Karamurza is also a friend of Nemtsov, but he's an intellectual. And I think that's the real problem, because also those people do not have a voice. They have a voice through the social networks, but we know that Putin will control more than ever all the social networks with a new law that passed a few days ago. He's able to control everything. But I think that we must really consider these huge dissatisfactions. I don't know, actually you don't have a political expression for it. And I think the only true candidate against Putin, the true credible candidate who could have probably be able to gather all the people would have been Nemtsov. And that's why Nemtsov was killed, obviously, because he was really the credible candidate for everyone. And Navalny probably, of course, attract people, because he's the only one. But he's not as credible as Nemtsov. And also Navalny is I would say, a little bit nationalistic candidate. And for these reasons, because of this nationalism, I think some of the people, more liberals in the opposition, do not like him that much. That's also a problem that we have to take into considerations.
So you say it's a shoo-in, really. Vladimir Putin will run again, will be re-elected. Why not then confirm he's running? What's the thinking behind that?
Well, it's very difficult to say. Maybe he want to create a sort of surprise. That wouldn't be a surprise at all for anyone. And I think that he just wants also to be the real agenda setter and to completely control the best time for him to make his announcement. But I think it's very interesting also to note is that the fact that you have the election on March 18. And March 18 will be the anniversary of the annexation of Crimea, which is also a symbol.
Right, we'll have to wait and see what the outcome is. Thank you very much indeed, Nicolas Tenzer, for coming in for today's Focus. Thank you.